Neil Young, cranking it out. Keep on rocking the free world. 60,000 people behind you. Central Park, epic. But you know that they're literally gonna pull the plug if he doesn't finish his jam in literally 1 minute.
Shit. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you're fired up because today my guest is one of the most networked men in the world. This guy has thrown a music festival with Jay-Z on the main stage. This guy has done a podcast with the Dalai Lama himself. This guy has this unique ability to reaching the highest level people on the planet and getting them to come hang out with him and do impact projects, one of which has raised $20 billion to help causes on the planet. I'm so excited to have him on today's show. His name is Michael Trainer. He's a very good friend of mine. So sit back, turn your phone off, get ready to take some notes. This episode is gonna light you up. All right, Michael Trainer in the motherfucking house today. Greatest stories never told. It's great to have you here, my man.
It's good to be here.
What is the one thing that happened to you in your youth that shaped who you became afterwards?
The one thing, I would say there were several things, but one of the things that had a profound effect on me, I think, was travel. I mean, my parents valued, I think, two things above all else: education and travel. And so I had the very good fortune of being able to see parts of the world at an early age that I think were very formative in my experience, and definitely instilled a value for global citizenship and traveling around the world and meeting the world's people and thinking that basically travel is one of the best educations we can have.
How'd the idea for Global Citizen come about?
Oh, Global Citizen. So that's that's a longer story, but for me at least, an aspect I don't often talk about is I lived for about 2 years in Sri Lanka, which is a country on the exact opposite side of the world from where I grew up in Chicago. And the impetus for that was multifold, but I had some traumatic experiences when I was young, and I had started to have fears of traveling beyond my comfort zone. And one of the things that I discovered was this thing called exposure therapy, which is the way through your greatest obstacle is to face it as head on as possible. And for me, again, I was kind of inculcated from an early age in a love of travel, but my first experience alone abroad, I got jumped by a gang.
Wow, what country was that in?
That was in Spain.
Tell me that story.
Well, I was in 7th grade, and I was for the very first time at like a discotheque. What my host brother was doing, bringing me to a discotheque at 7th grade, I have no idea.
Wow.
But someone had stolen his Coke and confronted him, and I went up and I was like, "What's going on?"
Yeah.
And the next thing I knew,
And you're saying Coca-Cola, right?
Coca-Cola. Yes.
Because
Coca-Cola.
7th graders these days, who knows what they're getting into?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
a Coca-Cola.
Okay.
Next thing I knew, I get clocked in the face, and I had no idea, but the guy wasn't just the guy, it was about 20 of them. And for a 7th grader, needless to say, it was a traumatic experience.
Man.
And so I associated, from that point on, this notion of being alone abroad with a context of trauma.
Were you beat up?
I got through.
Shock
it was intense because I was there on a study abroad program. The parents of my host brother forbade me from going to school because evidently this is a gang and it was super serious.
Okay.
So I actually wound up seeing them. So I never went to school, even though I was there on a study abroad. And on the beach one day, they saw me, and he literally takes a rock and shucks this huge rock.
The same guy from the club.
The same guy from the club hits me in the head, and then sends some of his cousins off to start punching. And at the time,
they don't fuck around in Spain.
They do not. At the time, it was I was a bit. I mean, I was I grew up in the city. I was a skater. I was at the time really into punk rock music, and I just remember. Being, and I've always been sort of bigger for my age, but I remember the last thing that my parents said when I got on the plane was, "Don't get in any trouble over there. Things work differently."
Yeah.
And so I just remember getting hit and wanting to fight back, but not because I felt like I had no idea what the consequences would be. I was in this whole new place.
Yes.
So basically,
fighting dirty over there. It sounds.
Oh yeah, dude, it was super dirty. So this guy came out of the shop, luckily, and started telling these guys off, and needless to say, I wound up, getting out of there without any like serious injuries, but had this freaking crazy experience where I was like, yo, like the world in which I grew up, and I was definitely not sheltered. I mean, I grew up in the city, but I started to associate being alone and away from the nest and the safety of the nest, so to speak, as being traumatic. So what I did was I decided to go as deep into that fear as possible. So Sri Lanka at the time was a country amidst civil war, and it was as far from my comfort zone reality as I could possibly imagine.
Into the chaos. Wow.
So I went in and wound up actually living there for 2 years. And during that time, to actually answer your question, I was exposed to this phenomenal worldview, right? So I wound up living and studying with the traditional healer, a shaman of sorts. And he basically was the mechanism by which when people, so in the traditional Sri Lankan worldview, there was no word for privacy and there's no word for possession. So different from our obviously Western worldview. And what that meant was, and this is sort of commensurate with many indigenous cultures, it was the role of the entire community to hold one in a balanced way. So health was considered imbalance. And so when someone fell out of balance, it was the role of the entire community to bring them back. And so the man that I lived and studied with basically taught me. He was a 7th generation healer, and he didn't have a son. And he took me in, he said, like a son, and offered me access to a very, very rare form of Ayurvedic shamanism and various tenets that I wound up learning later were extraordinarily rare. And so some of those tenets were about how you go about building and forging community. So when you asked
How
the
old were
question,
you at this point?
I was 19.
19.
And then I went back on a Fulbright scholarship at 21.
And he's teaching you about community,
Yes.
this shaman.
Yeah. He was teaching me about community, various tenets of health and well-being, but he was it was called Bhuta-vidya, so it's one of the 8 branches of Ayurveda. But basically it's around the sort of occult, so the psychosocial aspects of maintaining community and collective well-being. And so fast forward to Global Citizen, there was a couple of other gentlemen that we had this vision of how do we end extreme poverty on the planet. At the time, that was affecting 1.3 billion people. And for those that may be listening, the delineation for extreme poverty is those living under $1.25 or its equivalent a day. And that's, at the time, was 1.3 billion people. And so I had met these 2 gentlemen, and we said, how could we build a mechanism that would inspire a movement around ending extreme poverty? And at the time, the prevailing narrative was what I would call sort of poverty porn. It was like, you watch a video on television, it's like Sally Struthers will come on and show you this like poor child in Africa and be like, give up your cup of coffee, and it's like, maybe you feel guilty enough to give up your cup of coffee or whatever they say to support, but you don't feel a sense of shared humanity. And so we really wanted to build a movement that would be based in hope and inspiration rather than guilt and shame. And so the impetus for Global Citizen, from my point of view, was really taking some of those tenets that I had learned in Sri Lanka and thinking about, okay, if we were to construct a mechanism to build a movement, what would be the most effective vehicles? And at the time I thought, a feature film, like not a documentary, but a feature that was really compelling, I think can really move the needle. But
like Blood Diamond.
Blood Diamond is interesting. I think it brings a ton of awareness. But I think what often lacks in the context of films is so many millions of dollars go into producing this film. And even say like An Inconvenient Truth, it's like, even if it hits this like gestalt consciousness, there's still this question of what do you do afterwards, right? Like people throw their popcorn away, maybe they change their light bulbs, but is that adequate for the scale of the challenge? And I would say in the context of climate, so far it hasn't been. In the context of extreme poverty, what was beautiful about Global Citizen is, against all odds, because at the time we frankly didn't, we had no money, it was just a big vision, but from my point of view, there was another friend of mine that was really interested in doing, a music event. And so I said, all right, I think a music festival, as we've seen with Live 8 and other paradigms, has been successful in galvanizing global consciousness. And what I saw in Sri Lanka was the power of music, right? So music is integral to the ritual. And music is a universal language. So if you're going to truly inspire a global conversation and a global movement, music, I think, is one of the best ways to do it. And so we decided that we would go about building and creating a music festival. But I think the coolest thing that we did was we made it so we weren't asking you for your money. We were asking you sort of for your heart and your mind. In other words, we made it so that we kind of gamified social action. We said if you take action, if you learn about these issues, you'll get a point. If you, for example, sign a petition with the Gates Foundation around polio vaccines, you can get X number of points. And so we found different campaigns that we thought could move the needle to support those living in extreme poverty. And we made it so that as you took points, as you got points, you could basically gain access to this world-class event. So it was the great disruption because you can't actually sell tickets on the Great Lawn in Central Park. So one of my favorite concerts growing up was Simon and Garfunkel's concert in Central Park, but that was the last Saturday, that was in the 80s. And the reason is it costs a great deal of money to host on the Great Lawn because you have to pay the Conservancy, the police force, etc., but you can't sell tickets. Hence, very few, Stones never played there, Beatles never played there. So the sort of magic was we said, all right, well, we won't sell tickets. We'll make it so you have to do things to earn your ticket. And that year one, in 2012, we had 60,000 people. Were able to have, Neil Young, Black Keys, Foo Fighters, and I'm happy to talk about stories. The lead up to that was insane because we went from just an idea with no money to pulling that off in the context of 9 months.
Yeah, give me some context there.
Well, it's just a small team of us.
Okay.
Me and a couple other folks in the U.S. There was a small team in Australia, a small team in the U.K.
And how do you approach the first band, right? Or are you promoting or approaching like 10 at once and hoping?
No, it's actually a key question. It's
anchor?
actually a really great question. So I'll tell you a fun story. So one of the challenges you have is, of course, as an unproven concept, and I know you have a lot of entrepreneurs that are watching. One of the big challenges is how do you get those what I would call anchors, right? Like,
yes.
and an anchor is what will enroll others to be a part of it because it all of a sudden feels real enough, right? So when you just have an idea, I think it's really.
Sorry, let me pause. For the people who don't know you,
yes,
you don't just do this music festival, you do all types of events, big and small, with amazing groups of people.
Yes.
Everything from like a small 10-person dinner around a cause, or just getting 10 people together to have an interesting conversation, to the one-on-ones in your podcast where you've had guests like Maria Sharapova, Ryan Holiday, Laird Hamilton.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that you have this ability to do so, and I'm seeing that anchor point as a continuing thing because once you get the first big podcast guest, it's easier to get the second one, right? Once you have someone going to the dinner that is a known name, then everyone else says yes.
Spot on.
No one wants to be that first person, just like when you're raising money for a company. If they've got Peter Thiel investing, everyone's writing checks.
Exactly.
But if they've got, Peter, Paul, and Mary, or whoever, no one knows. Actually, that'd be a good person to have on your deck, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
But you know what I'm saying.
No, I think you make a very astute point, and I think that's spot on, and probably one of the ways we can be of most value to the audience is whenever you're trying to bring an idea into reality, the caliber of the anchor matters, right? And you bring up the context of investing. Spot on. In the context of investing, who your anchor investor is, can be profound in the context of the other floodgates that open, right?
Because if you were doing a dinner and it was with, say, Richard Branson, you could call basically anyone you already know.
Yep.
And they might even cancel plane tickets.
Yeah.
That they have to be at this dinner with Richard Branson, or buy a plane ticket.
That's right.
Or write a big check to a charity to be there.
Yeah, 100%. So
but then it stair steps down. If you've got the founder of, let's say, a local restaurant that people like to go to.
Yep.
That's an anchor point.
Sure.
But people probably aren't going to cancel a plane trip.
Depends on who you're going after. I think knowing your audience is key, right? That's true. Because you're absolutely spot on. I probably wouldn't cancel plans to go see a Top Chef, but if you're in the food industry and you get this 3-star Michelin chef, then probably those who are, I think that's
so know your audience.
Knowing your audience is key.
Then think about what your anchor is going to be and find the anchor that works for that audience, and maybe don't think you have to have this huge universal anchor to do something. Don't think you need to have Richard Branson willing to do something with you to host a dinner.
Exactly.
It could be someone who has just started a company that's doing $1 million in revenue.
That's right.
Which to people who are interested in business can be really exciting.
Yeah, I think so you bring up an important point. So I'll answer your first question.
Yeah, and I want to get back into the story.
Yeah, no, I'll tell you the story first.
See you doing this.
But I'll come back to this because I almost look at it in a way like a pyramid, like a triangle. And the anchor is in a way the apex of that pyramid.
Okay.
And the base is, because I know one of the things we had talked about was this notion of how you build profound relationships. And I'll revisit this later. But you can approach it a variety of different ways. You can go with the anchor first, which makes everything cascading down easier.
Okay.
Or you can build up. And there's an amazing story that Tim Ferriss tells about a video guy that he had worked with. And he actually wound up volunteering and then stacked each of his successful jobs to get to a higher. So he actually filmed with Richard Branson. But how did he do it? He first filmed with Tim Ferriss for free. And then he used that video as leverage to sort of ascend up the triangle, if you will. So I'm happy to go more into that. But to actually answer your question about how we pulled it off, with Global Citizen, it was a really interesting use case because no one wants to be the first to say yes, right? So like if you're looking at that anchor, so we went after a couple key partnerships. So we first, and the key to, I think, this for anyone listening is how do you add value to those who you're seeking to be in relationship with? Always leading with value. I think that can't be under-articulated. And so we knew that we needed credibility in both the philanthropic space as well as in the music space. So we went after adding value first to Bill Gates. I saw that polio was his core priority at the time. And we wound up doing a campaign and raising about $108 million through 5 different countries. And that enabled a level of trust where they were willing to partner with us.
Wait, that sounds like a huge thing, though.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound like something you casually do.
No, it was.
$108 million for Bill Gates.
We did this Chogam, which is a gathering of world leaders that generally isn't around commitments, but we saw it as an opportunity in time. So we saw an event that had a huge gathering of people that we wanted to be in association with. And we also saw the opportunity with the Gates Foundation, which is, arguably the preeminent foundation in regards to philanthropic efforts, especially as it relates to the extreme poor. And we saw an opportunity there we actually hosted a smaller concert with John Legend and wound up raising this $108 million, which I'm happy to go into.
As Global Citizen?
As Global Citizen, but pre-festival.
So your first Global Citizen thing was, if I'm hearing this right,
yes,
you heard about another conference going on with some heavy hitters.
Correct.
You somehow got John Legend to perform in that same geographic area at the same time.
Well, we actually explicitly flew him over, and that was based on relationships. So one of the tenets I would also say is, so one of the early supporters of ours was Hugh Jackman, and Hugh basically was very good friends with John Legend.
Okay.
And so going, I think first when you're first starting off and trying to launch an idea, knowing who's in your closest circle of influence is an important thing to keep in mind, right? So like, for example, I'm about to do this campaign around climate, right? We haven't even explicitly talked about it, but I've started to socialize it with you. You're in my circle of influence. Obviously, you're also an extraordinarily impactful person and have an incredible circle yourself. So for us, going to someone who already was in the sort of trust tree or that circle of influence and saying, hey, and you want to be careful when you make your asks, and you want to be giving way more than you ever ask, but to make an ask for an introduction where it's also in someone's interest is a key way we were able to build momentum. So that concert enabled us to build a relationship with the Gates Foundation. We simultaneously were able to build a relationship with Golden Voice, which actually AEG hosts Coachella, which many people will know.
Yeah, so Golden Voice is the company that puts on Coachella. Correct. And a couple other big music festivals.
Massive. Okay. And we sat with Bill Fold, who's now a dear friend of mine, and super intimidating. It's like when you're starting an idea and you're sitting across. We're in LA Live, downtown LA, and here's a guy. He's the sweetest guy in the world. But when I first met him, he's got tats up his neck. He had wraparound sunglasses. He's a co-founder of Coachella.
What's his name?
His name's Bill Fold. And he's partners with Paul Tollett, and they launched Coachella. But we're sitting there and pitching this guy who's arguably one of the biggest in the industry, super humble. But at the time I didn't know him, And we had this idea and we pitched him on it. And I remember literally calling him. I had done a talk at Harvard and was on a Chinatown bus because it cost $8 to go from Boston to New York City. Because we had no money, didn't have a pot to piss in.
Okay.
And basically, calling him, and he was like, "Yeah, I'll get behind you guys," And so like with the Gates Foundation and AEG, we had sort of credibility in the philanthropic space and in the music space. So then to get to your actual question, the key was getting the anchor artist.
Okay. I need more details of the backstory.
Okay, you got it.
Because people see the Global Citizen Festival on the Great Lawn in Central Park.
Right.
And they don't realize that that wasn't the first thing you guys did.
No.
And the raising of $108 million, was that the first thing you guys did together?
No, we did it too. Really it came down to getting those initial core anchors. And what did that look like? So basically, we went after building relationships with those that would give us the qualifications to go after the big artists. And to do that without having a proven track record, we basically worked hard first to build relationships with large-scale credible entities like the Gates Foundation and like Golden Voice, which actually produces Coachella, one of the largest music festivals in the world. But the key really was for the festival was to get that headliner, right? How do you get that anchor artist?
So first you got the Gates Foundation involved and Golden Voice. So then when you're talking to artists, you could say, hey, Gates Foundation's on board, Golden Voice is on board.
Exactly.
Got it.
And there's big backstory, but we won't go into that right now. But basically, exactly right. We were able to build relationship through adding value, and we're able to ostensibly get these incredible organizations on board in principle, but all of it rested on us getting that first anchor artist, right? And so what I would share about that story that was so powerful, and for those listening, I think that they can apply in their own lives, is that required us getting extremely uncomfortable, one, and two, moving beyond the no, right? So I think one thing is, I actually think embracing no's is really helpful because it tests your resolve, but there's also an opportunity, I think, in the business context to say, okay, what's beyond the no, right? Is it a definitive no? Okay, great, move on. Or is it a no, but if this was here, it might be a yes. And in the context of the artists, we had a no from the Black Keys, who at the time, which actually Rolling Stone just deemed their album one of the 15 best of the decade.
Yeah, and they're a really hot touring band as well.
They're amazing.
Yeah.
They're one of my favorite bands. And they were a no, but not because they weren't interested. They actually had an interview at K-Rock on the exact day we were hosting the Global Citizen Festival.
Okay.
So what we did was we said, all right, we actually had Silva, one of the managers for Foo Fighters, say, we're a conditional yes. So Foo Fighters, huge band, we're conditional yes if you can get another sort of A-list caliber act, right? So, because no one really wants to be the first to jump in on unproven quantity. It can blow back in your face.
Right.
And so that was a totally reasonable request.
Yeah.
But we basically had to think really creatively about, okay, how do you get that no to a yes? Because we knew if Black Keys signed on, Foo Fighters would be yes, we'd have a festival.
Got it.
And so, I remember we actually met at Milk Studios with the head of FedEx, and made a bold ask. They were gracious enough. They gave us a $250,000 sort of in-kind donation to enable us to ship the Black Keys backline, basically all their equipment, overnight, if they were to say yes. And we went to K-Rock, and K-Rock's like, we'll agree to move the interview by a day if they say yes. So we basically were like, okay, well, we're not going to ask them to lose anything on their end, right?
Yes.
How do we keep the interview? But at the same time, how do we potentially create a new context for a yes? So K-Rock said we would be willing to shift it. FedEx said we're willing to ship their whole backline overnight and then back again. And then with that, went to Nashville. Black Keys went from a no to a yes. And with that, basically Foo Fighters were in.
Wow.
And then
you had a
unbeknownst to us, also opening to Serendipity, Neil Young had polio when he was a kid. And very few people knew that. And because we had done this campaign with the Gates Foundation around one of Gates' core priorities at the time, which was polio eradication, it had this really amazing through line. And so year one, we had Neil Young, Black Keys, Foo Fighters, And John Legend came and sang Imagine on the Great Lawn, which, as you can...
Okay, so you guys are producing this insane music festival.
Yeah.
And did you have the Golden Voice people doing the production, or weren't you? Because I'd be freaking out. Like, what if the fucking, Foo Fighters get out there and they start talking and the microphone isn't plugged in?
It was wild. Like,
did you have that?
Yeah, no, we had incredible partners. Partners that I mean, it was a lot of restless, sleepless nights. The whole team worked their tushes off.
Yeah, because you got to make sure you don't have another Fire Festival.
Oh yeah, Fire Festival hadn't happened yet, but definitely
you could have been the pioneers if you had fucked it up.
Thankfully, we were not, and that was a total testament to team effort. But there were moments like I remember the last song, because they have a hard stop, Central Park, because you got all those homeowners.
Oh right.
Hard stop, 10 o'clock, and Neil Young, who's famous for his epic jams, is playing "Keep on Rockin' in the Free World" with Dave Grohl. You got the Foo Fighters, you got the Black Keys, Neil Young cranking it out. "Keep on Rockin' the Free World," 60,000 people behind you, Central Park, epic. But that they're literally gonna pull the plug if he doesn't finish his jam in literally 1 minute.
Shit. So
and he epically closes right in time.
Oh really? He knew.
Yeah, he closed right in time. Yeah. And the event raised $1.3 billion.
$1.3 billion.
Serving the.
How do you raise that much money? Is it corporate donations?
Yeah, so it's not a person for
the people had to do social sharing and charity work to get a ticket?
Social shares, taking actions, learning about the issues, and then those actions were turning into points.
That's what the 60,000 people did to get tickets.
Correct, but 60,000 was chosen from hundreds of thousands that had taken action because the artists were pushing this out on their social media.
Oh,
right?
wow, okay.
We had the largest syndicated broadcast of its time. We had New York Times front page, Yahoo, YouTube, all of them sort of agreed because of the cause to broadcast this. So we had this incredible distribution reach, and the power of that was then taking all these people's voices and basically leveraging that with world leaders who then made the declarative commitments. And we chose strategically to host the festival at the very end of the UNGA. For those that don't know, that's the UN General Assembly. It's the time of year when all the world's leaders descend on New York.
New York.
So
we
chose this very
concert?
strategic. Yeah, we created, and they spoke on stage.
So they're making pledges on a country level.
Country level, corporations are making.
It gets to 1.3 billion.
Right. So it's a commitment framework, not a direct donation, right?
Okay.
We're not asking people to give money.
Okay.
It's basically leveraging the voices of global citizens. And now at this stage, and I'm no longer there, but millions of global citizens are now part of this movement.
And then they're doing it now in Africa and
I just went with the Mandela family.
DC lawn.
Yeah, correct. The lawn in DC for Earth Day, that was the 250,000 person event that came through the course of the day. Did one in South Africa around the Mandela legacy, which was super powerful, and was just announced. That was several $1 billion were committed there. Amazing to see it in F&B Stadium in Johannesburg. Again, I'm not sort of working on that day to day anymore, but to see that grow in the way that the team's grown it, and now. This coming year, 2020, there's going to be a 5-continent global citizen. It's going to be a Live Aid for the sort of 21st century. So it's beautiful to both, to birth something, with an incredible team and then see it grow, but also to learn the lessons that we learned in the process of building.
Yeah. So what's it feel like the day after you put something like that on? And you're just walking the streets of New York.
I mean, to me, it was like postpartum depression. I mean, I've never given birth to a child, but I felt I got extraordinarily sick for a week afterwards. I mean, you're working with our team. We were working, nonstop, and there was a week I remember where we lost $1 million commitment in terms of that basic supporting to make the event happen, and we lost $1 million in our business model. And a headliner basically looked like it was going to fall away. So the stress of keeping all those balls in the air, took its toll. So to answer your question, I mean, it was extraordinarily it's like you kind of go on just from the depths of your soul, hold it together, and then there's this exaltation. But then the next day it was just absolutely collapsed.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so you were on board for
the first 3 festivals.
The first 3 festivals. Yep. And the second 2 were a little smoother. I'm sure they had.
Oh no,
I'm sure it was easier to get bands.
It gets better and easier once you have that credibility. I wouldn't say it becomes easy, But, and there was whole stories between 1 and 2, et cetera. But, I think once you have the credibility of a successful first event, it becomes, it's like that anchor in and of itself, right?
So
the event becomes the anchor.
How'd you get Jay-Z
Well,
Beyonce, or is there any big headliners that have interesting stories of how you got them for the future years?
Well, so, it was interesting. At the South Africa concert, actually, Jay-Z and Beyonce co-headlined, which was epic to be in South Africa, and it was Coldplay and Pharrell, all these amazing artists. But, I think there's always interesting synergies. There's Chime for Change had sort of risen up, which had a lot of powerful names behind it as well. And what's been cool with Global Citizen is it was never intended to be a traditional charity. It was more like, how do we create the umbrella for a movement? And I think when you look at artists, whether it be Jay-Z, Alicia Keys was an amazing example. She actually performed in year 2, and I got to fly down to Brazil and interview her. She has her own charitable efforts. And I think it's really important to think about what's of value to the other person, right? I think in any context of relationship building or business building, it's always like, how can we add value to you first, right? So, of course, there's this incredible ask, and there's an altruistic interest, right? Which we knew, say, for example, Alicia Keys was aligned because of her own charitable endeavors.
That was the value you could give to her.
Well, the value to her was, we can one, find ways to bring awareness to and support her charity, but 2, I think one of the reasons why Global Citizen has been as successful is it becomes a beacon for those who have aligned interests, but you're also playing off both altruistic interest and enlightened self-interest. And what do I mean by that? I think when people are building their visions, it's always important to think about, how can I first lead by adding massive value to you? And so when you're asking an artist to perform, obviously first they have to believe in the cause and be committed to the cause. But secondarily, it's super helpful when you can augment that by saying, hey, and by the way, we'd love for you to be featured on stage in front of, X millions of people. And it's, by the way, on the Great Lawn in Central Park. So it's this incredible sort of coveted, stage. So thinking about people's enlightened self-interest and aligning that with also a bigger altruistic interest in a way that feels like the maximum win-win. I think that's what we need. I think we need to think more and more about how to create win-win paradigms, because when you think about that win-win, then I think you have the capacity to scale. And then things become, with momentum and alignment, then also you have the relationships of those, because if you do a successful endeavor, then people are willing to talk to their friends, right? And in the world of artists, obviously everyone pretty much knows each other, so it's a context of like, once something's been successful, then people saying, okay, yeah, I'm willing to stand for this. And like, there's like this famous video on YouTube of like movement building, and it's this like guy dancing on a hill, and then they talk about like, basically there's the sort of the starter, but then there's the first follower, and that first follower is integral in the success of the movement.
Yeah.
And after the first follower, you see like on the hill, there's like 2 or 3 other people come and dance with the first follower, and then once those 3 people come, then a swarm of people come, and it's like this, like everyone's dancing to the music, right?
Yeah.
So I think a movement is very analogous to that. It's right. It's like that first bold move. Then those first followers, those anchors, are really critical.
Yes.
Then from that, they refer their friends come in, and then you hit that critical impasse where it can become a catalyst for something way bigger.
Okay. So you're a master at doing this in many arenas, from the biggest stages in the world to intimate dinner parties to one-on-ones with your podcast. What are some other examples of how you are giving value to people in those settings? Say a dinner party. Say you're going to host a dinner party.
Sure.
What are you thinking about when you're trying to assemble the group and make it something that is a win for all?
Yeah. Well, I think dinner parties are, so having moved from New York to Los Angeles, I was really interested in dinner parties because it wasn't something I could do in New York, right? I mean, everyone's apartments are small, and you'd go out and you connect, and you're a master at this as well. I think one of the beauties of a dinner party is, there's a tremendous ability to build community. Just like music is a catalyst for community, food and dining is such a catalyst for community, and obviously requires, significantly less effort than throwing a large-scale event, but yet has this profound potential to build relationship. Why it's so powerful is there's a real, one of my personal pet peeves is when people reach out and they're like, "Can I pick your brain?" Right? It feels very like extractive. I just don't like the word "pick." It just, I don't know, something about it feels weird.
Sounds like they're going to take something out of the brain and not leave anything in return.
Exactly. It feels very. So what I say to people is like, if you're looking to build like a world-class relationships or community, is again, think about how can I add massive value. And so what's so powerful about a dinner party is if you kind of deconstruct it, there's a few ways in which it's a massive value add for everyone, if it's well curated. One, instead of doing, especially in LA, you drive anywhere, it's 20 minutes to an hour. If you drive, that's 2 hours of your day for maybe a coffee meeting with one person, that's an hour. Now, if that's an extremely important meeting, that's totally worthwhile. The beauty of a dinner party is 10, 20 people. You can bring all of those, you can save yourself 40 hours of the one-on-ones with those people by bringing them all into one place. And if it's well curated, you're not only adding the value of the ability to have a communication with them, but you're actually adding the context of potential relationships with the 9 or 19 other people meeting each other. And I remember actually listening to, I think both Neil Strauss and Tim Ferriss do this as well. When they meet someone new, if someone asks to have a coffee or whatnot, they'll say, well, you know what, I have a regular, I think Neil's is a Tuesday night dinner. I think Tim, I don't know exactly what he does, but a hike, something like that. It's a beautiful opportunity with new people because there's also the risk, just like with, say, dating, right? Where it maybe isn't a total fit. Person could be a wonderful person, but we all know, we've all had those experiences where a few minutes in, you're like, this isn't exactly resonant with, my highest and best in terms of what I'd like to, achieve or just chemistry. So the beauty of this hike or this dinner party context is you also, if it, for example, is going south, guess what? It's not a loss because there's not this awkward conversation. They're going to connect with other people they likely will have resonance with, and you also don't have egg on your face for being blowing them off or flaking or leaving, right? So there's all kinds. This is
blowing my mind right now because my new thing that I do is meet someone for a coffee or for breakfast.
Yeah.
Because then you get to have that good connection.
Totally.
And then you still have the whole day to do your own thing.
Yes.
And as I've met more people, the amount of breakfasts I've been having is getting to be a lot.
Yes.
And the thought of just doing a standing, say, Tuesday breakfast and making it perhaps 4 people, and maybe it's 2 hours instead of 1.
Yeah.
But then I'm getting to spend time with 3 people over the 2 hours instead of, 1 person or maybe it'd be 6 people, who knows?
Yes.
But just optimizing
totally
would be super valuable because there's a lot of people that I would love to get to have the breakfast with that I don't, just because we all have a lot going on.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's spot on, and it's you have that breakfast. I love the way that you're doing breakfast because I think one of the other key things is how do you optimize the time that, how do you go where nowhere else is going? And I think dinners are pretty common, but a breakfast is I actually think it's a beautiful context. One of the advantages to having a dinner, I will say though, is if you have resonance, you can basically be hey, let's, with those you have real resonance with, if you are looking for a more intimate setting, say you started off the dinner with 20 people, for 4 or 5, you can be let's go out for drinks after, right? So you can, it almost self-selects itself to where you can add value for everyone, and then where you want to build even further, you can sort of create a context where they're already there, and you just go off and you can sort of deepen that relationship. And then if you want to have a one-on-one, you can be all right, let's get together next Tuesday at I have my annual weekly breakfast. So I think what's been great for me is now and I know you have a context of a very regular event. I've been thinking about actually in 2020 doing a dinner every month. Because what I love is when I meet new people. So for example, this week I went to support a dear friend at the Troubadour, my friend Austin from Magic Giant. And I met, a handful of new people. And one of the things I love, it's also a great mechanism for asking for someone's information. Say you have a casual conversation and I'm oh, I'd love to get your information. It can be awkward because sometimes people don't know when to ask. Have we built enough rapport for?
They don't know if you're going to be hey, I want to pick your brain.
Yeah,
shit.
Pick
What's
your brain, or
if
it's a woman and you're a guy, they're I don't know, what's the intention?
Yeah.
So I think one of the beautiful things is I love having something that I can invite someone to, and if there's it's also a group thing, and if there's resonance, it's an easy threshold for them to say yes to giving me their information. So when I say, hey, by the way, I throw dinner parties, you know, and they may say, well, what kind of dinner parties? And I say, well, you know, I like to basically do, you know, I kick it off for those who are interested with the meditation, then I have a dinner, and then traditionally I'll have a musician do some kind of an unplugged set. And it's about bringing together different people from different industries and just having a fascinating conversation. It's not networky, it's very much about the alchemy of the group. Generally, people are like, oh yeah, I'm interested.
Sounds great.
Like, take my information.
And if you've never done this, the power of getting these people that are all high level in the same room to talk about unique subjects or talk about the same thing that they're all into is super compounding.
Right.
I always talk about the power of the hive mind.
Yes.
And how, if you ever go to the fair and there's like, guess the weight of this giant cow.
Yes, totally.
You know, and everyone puts in and you guess the weight, and whoever gets the guess the closest gets a prize, right?
Yes, yeah.
Well, and then they do it with jelly beans too. They'll have the huge jar of jelly beans, and it says, guess how many are in here, and whoever gets it gets to win the jar, or whatever, right?
Yep.
So they did a study on those type of contests, and they found that the average person that writes one and puts it in is going to be off.
Yep.
Mostly by a lot. They're going to be either low or high.
Yes.
And not so much dead on.
Totally.
But if you take all of the guesses in a contest like that and you average them out, it's usually almost correct.
Really?
Fascinating, right?
It is.
Yes. And it's the power of the hive mind. It's the power of group collaboration.
Totally.
When you get everyone guessing, you know, that's why humans are still here, man.
Dude, I literally, I was watching a documentary on this, and it's talking about the default mode network in our brains. And in the context of this documentary, it was actually about sort of psychotropic plants and how traditional ceremonies were used to encourage that hive mind. So it went back to like the ancient Egyptians and the Mayans, and like how they all had ceremonies which were ostensibly kind of going back to the traditional hero that I spoke about, right? Where there was this context of a ceremony in which there was basically a shared narrative that bound the group back together, you know? And I think today that one could argue sporting events do that, you know? It's basically like an opportunity for people to get together and sort of all orient their attention around one thing. There's such a magical power to that possibility of the hive mind, you know, the peak mind, so to speak.
Yes.
And it's something I've been doing so much research into. It's like, how do we get into those gestalt states? I mean, Silicon Valley now, they're actually doing experiments with like binaural beats and heart
Putting
rhythms.
everyone on the same.
Exactly, because problem solving can be so much more prolific when everyone starts to get into, for lack of a better term, synchronicity, right? So I think one of the things I've been really fascinated by researching, working on, is this notion of, you know, optimal performance, peak mind. How do you actually enter into those like theta states? But then also, how do we do that collectively? Right?
Yes.
Like, how do we actually enter into exactly as you described that hive mind and transcend that, like that default mode network, such that we can enter into that collective consciousness?
Well, it's something magical when you're all around a table.
Yes.
And diving into a specific thing.
Yes.
That happens, you know? And I love that saying that you're the sum of the 5 people you spend most of your time
Me too.
with.
Yeah, 100%.
Because naturally, if you hang out with unhealthy people, you're going to pick up unhealthy habits. If you hang out with healthy people, you're going to hear about biohacks and, you know, people optimizing their workout routines.
Yep.
And you're going to order healthier food, most likely, or even be eating at a healthier restaurant.
100%.
You know, the same is true as if you're hanging out with people who are successful in business versus people who are just scraping by. If you're hanging out with people who are successful in business, you're going to learn those good habits. The people who are scraping by, they're probably blowing their money on gambling or drugs or, you know, excess. And you pick up on that, you know, and doing these types of gatherings, whether it's a dinner, whether it's a breakfast, whether it's just a meetup, puts you in a container with, ideally, especially if you're selecting it yourself, people who are at a level you want to be at, you know, that's probably a little higher than you are. And the other thing I love about it is it doesn't cost anything.
Yeah.
So Sarah and I do events now where we, you know, bring in a catering company and we spend
you throw nice
a good
events.
amount of money. But I've been doing this since I was just getting started in marketing.
Your Thai food days.
Thai food days. I told you about these, man. The Money Mondays Marketing Mastermind.
I remember.
And we'd have everyone come over to one person's house. We'd order Thai food, take
Yeah.
turns paying for the food. It was never more than like $70 because
Totally.
it's Thai. It's easy to share. And just dive into some Thai food. People would be talking with marketing, about with other people. And then maybe one or two people would do a little 20-minute presentation on something that was exciting for them. And we did it, as often as we could. And we'd host it at someone's house. But you could do this at Starbucks. You could have like your pumpkin spice power meetup or some shit like that.
Totally.
And be like, hey, I get 7 people together at Starbucks every Tuesday at 7 p.m. and we have the pumpkin spice power meetup.
100%.
And people would be like all over that because it's unique and it's the collaboration that I think a lot of people crave, this like live collaboration.
Hungering.
Because so much shit is done on social media and all that, and when you go to your job, you're forced to do things that are with people that maybe aren't like on the same wavelength as you.
You're also creating a platform, right? I think one of the things for 21st century sort of, I don't like the word networking. I think networking is dead, ostensibly.
Yes.
But relationship building. Harvard did a fascinating study, the longest longitudinal study of its kind. This gentleman, Robert Waldinger, totally recommend checking him out. But they found that the greatest corollary to your long-term health and happiness is what? Quality of your long-term relationship.
That's right. The blue zones, right?
That's it. Yeah, blue zones. So this community, I think one of the great challenges of 21st century living is we have this fallacy of connection through technology, right? Which is not actually connection. In fact, mostly it's FOMO or like, triggering, oh, well, this person's highlight reel looks really great. Why isn't mine looking like that? And there's an epidemic of loneliness, especially amongst, well, not just amongst young people, but I think it's one of the more prolific issues amongst young people. And so if you can create a platform that is about creating dynamic experiences for other people, you then are seen as the node. And being a node in a world of sort of super connection is such a powerful place. And you're absolutely right. It doesn't have to cost money actually at all. So like one of the things I like to do is I'll do a morning hike. Costs nothing, right? Now, granted, we live in Los Angeles. I've lived in places like New York and other places where hiking, especially in the wintertime, isn't really an option. But, it's only bound by your creativity, like you can, it can be a walk. It can be like, like anything I think that brings people together in a unique way. I think that's one of the things Summit did well was moving beyond a traditional conference into experiential learning. So like I'm doing archery with someone, or like I'm doing rock climbing.
Or let's all get city bikes.
Yeah, exactly, city bikes, yeah.
To a coffee shop.
Exactly, and I had a friend who did that. My buddy Jesse Israel in New York started a bicycle club. And I remember when we were in New York, like you wouldn't get exercise, 1, and 2, like you're working all the time. So like we'd all ride in mass on like 40, 50 bikes through new neighborhoods in Brooklyn or go up to the cloisters. And it was like so cool. And it was the beginning. He went on to start Medi Club and like this meditation club. Literally gets to people, he has something now called the Big Quiet. He gets people together, which you wouldn't think in New York back in the day where most social interactions were around alcohol, that people would be down with it. It's created a whole movement, and people get together and they literally meditate together.
That's
and so
amazing.
like,
Yeah.
and again, something that's like totally free, but yet adds this sort of sense of community. Daybreakers, another great example, morning dance party. Who would have thought that people would get up at 6 in the morning sober and go put on costumes and dance?
Dance like crazy.
They go nuts, right?
Yeah.
Rada. So anyway, dear friends that are doing really cool sort of disruption, right? Thinking about where people aren't, creating an opportunity through an experience for people to connect and bond together. It's like, it actually turns into a platform. And I think having a platform like this, like your podcast, right? It will lead to, and we've talked about this because I remember us having lunch and talking about you launching this podcast. I remember my own journey with launching my podcast, how much that platform has improved my life, right? Like I wouldn't be here having this amazing conversation with you, even though we're dear friends, if it weren't for these platforms. And I think one of the things in the 21st century is thinking about, as you want to build world-class relationships, what's your platform? And that doesn't mean it has to be a massive thing.
Yeah.
In fact, I think sometimes the more niche, the better. But like what it does is it creates this beacon that attracts those who have aligned vision and values to you. And to your point, you become the sum of those 5 people you spend the most time with. And so like as you attract people of resonance, and then also what I would recommend is consciously diversifying, right? Like there's also this, common saying, but like, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room,
Right.
right? Like, so like, how do you consciously up level with people who are like thinking on a whole next level? But if you're even the node, you don't have to be as quote unquote, and I don't like this word successful, because how do we even define success? You know,
Right.
Billionaire could be miserable. Someone who affects 1 billion people could be happy as the day he was born, but not have very little money. So it's like, but whatever your definition of success is, how do you create a platform, and then how do you surround yourself with people that are an exemplification of those top 5, if you will, of those virtues and values personified, such that your life will be a step up. And if you can create a platform or context to bring those people together, it becomes a catalyst, because they tell their friends.
Yeah,
and generally, successful people hang out with other successful people.
One of the masters of this is our mutual friend John Levy, who's been on the show before he started the Influencer Dinner.
Yes.
I think he started back in 2010, before the word influencer was even a thing.
Exactly.
And now I think he's done, I don't know, like 1,000 dinners or something like insane like that.
Yeah,
with
he's
Harvard scientists and Nobel Prize winners. And we hosted one with him at our house. And when I say with him, we just let him do it at our house. He has all these people, and his invites are automated.
Really?
He doesn't reach out anymore. It's a system of referrals, because people come to his dinner, they have such a great time that they refer a friend or two.
Genius.
And he's got the highest caliber people in the world, from like the director of X-Men to, at my house, the director of Boys in the Hood, John Singleton, passed away recently. Rest in peace. I love that movie. I was sitting right next to him at dinner time.
Wow.
And then across the table from me, someone who became one of my really good friends, I don't want to say his name, but was in a major top 10 selling band in the world. And John had never met either of them before that night, just because he built the system where people had such a good experience at his dinner, which was his platform, that they told a friend.
Yep.
And it just self-perpetuates. And he does it in San Francisco, he does it in LA, he does it in New York. And the guy is has such a Rolodex.
He created a platform.
Like yourself, you two are probably two of the guys I know. And Nick Gray is another one who does these little cocktail parties in New York at his apartment. Where he just has a few people over for cocktails, and then he'll pull out a timer and he'll be like, all right, guys, here's the question, and we're all going to spend 3 minutes giving our answer to the question, and everyone goes around and gets to answer the question, and you get to learn from what everyone else is saying. He's a master at that too.
People yearn for it, and I know one of the things John does is he actually has people cook, right? So he'll have like these pretty what's cool, what I like about what he does is he creates sort of constructs where it's like you don't share what you do, right?
Right, you're not allowed to talk about your
I think
career.
that's part of the reason why I think networking is dead, because I think everyone's tired of like going to a conference where they have a name tag and it's like, someone's looking at you, but the first question is, what do you do? And then they're looking over your shoulder to see if someone more important is behind. It's like, it's actually more of a withdraw than it is, again, a give. And I think the beauty of like exactly what you're sharing, one of the things that you're amazing at, one of the things I love to do is like, if you have these dinners, which don't have to be super involved, it's a give. It's a give because you've created a context for other people to get together and connect with other amazing people, and everyone yearns for connection. It's one of the things we yearn for the most today. So if you can be a catalyst for other people connecting, even if it's not with yourself, but with someone else, like you said, like John, probably doesn't, he may or may not be even close with that person who's now become your good friend, but he was the reason that you and that person connected, and you will still attribute to him the sourcing of that connection. So like the shine, if you will, the downstream consequence still sort of goes into the mind share of you as the catalyst for that connection. And I think anyone can do that, and it's one of the greatest, simplest but yet greatest hacks. I mean, I remember my dad telling me, that the biggest thing you can get in business, and I think in life as well, is a referral, right? Because it's like, what's the best way if I want, and it goes back to anything, whether it be Peak Mind, Global Citizen, anything is about who you know that trusts you, caring about you enough to open up their net with someone you don't know, and basically vouching for you and saying, hey, you should meet this person.
Yes.
Because they know you. They're willing to sort of put their skin in the game to say, I think you guys would vibe, and then you as the connector actually, assuming that connection goes well, which is you vouching for both people probably will, you get the shine on that because you're just leading with giving. And I think the more people think about leading with giving, the more exponentially epic their life will be.
Amen. Now, let's zoom in.
Okay.
Because after Global Citizen, you started a podcast called Peak Mind, which I was honored to be a guest on.
You were a great guest.
And you just like had the most insane lineup of guests on the show out the gate. I mean, you know, we mentioned some of the names.
Yep.
And we could go on. You know, I saw you just had Ryan Holiday. I think we already mentioned him, but
he hit New York Times well, it wasn't because of my podcast, but he hit #1 on the New York Times bestseller list 2 days later, and I was like, man, epic. That again, case in point, like someone like as epic as that. He wrote one of my top 5 books, Obstacles Away, of all time, and he came to my living room.
In your living room, yeah.
You know, to have a conversation with
studio,
yeah.
And you film it yourself.
Yeah, totally.
You know, and it looks great, and it's high value conversation because it's about the content.
It is, and that's something. I mean, now, I mean, we're seeing that. I mean, I think we're in a real sort of. We've kind of hit this point now where, because of the low barrier entry, whether it's you know, I used to be, and I still am into photography, but like now anyone can look like an amazing photographer because the ubiquitousness of the phone. Podcasts as well. Like anyone who has the ability to record audio can launch a podcast, right? So I think what's amazing is there's so many different opportunities to sort of create a platform. But to your point, yeah, I think what's helpful for those listening is what's your point of differentiation. And I knew that like I'd probably grow a lot more quickly if I chose a particular niche and was like, this is where I'm going.
Got it.
But I didn't. I have very diverse interests, and so I've sacrificed to a degree, I think, on growth, speed of growth, by being like, okay, well, I'm going to go after the people I find most interesting, regardless of their field, right? I think a lot of podcasts, for example, are very genre specific.
Yes.
And mine, which is tough because then you're going against the titans who have been in the game for a long time, like
right.
the Joe Rogans and the Tim Ferrisses.
Yeah.
But I was just like, okay.
If you did all meditation people, you could have the #1 meditation podcast.
Exactly.
But then you're kind of limited.
Then every guest you talk to, and so I don't like to be in an echo chamber.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's like I can talk to you, you know, one of the most brilliant copywriters on the planet, but then I can talk to Laird Hamilton, you know, one of the best big wave surfers on the planet, and then, you know, Maria Sharapova, one of the best tennis players. So, and all get at their mindset. Because for me, that's what's fascinating is, right? Like, what's the mindset that distinguishes those who have not just achieved, but I think achieved a certain level of fulfillment, right? Because I think that's what we're chasing now is, to me, I think there's success, which is traditionally defined, which I'm not naive to, but I think there's also fulfillment. And I think, especially as people become very successful in the traditional context, whether that be wealth, fame, what have you, you know, you listen to like a Mike Posner or Russell Brand, you know, it ain't what it's everything that it's sold to be, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then the question becomes, well, okay, well, what then leads to true fulfillment? Because that's actually the end game we should be chasing.
Right.
And so that's the question that's driving me is like,
and that's
what are
what's answered on your show. Yeah,
exactly.
So check out Peak Mind, the show, if you haven't. It's fantastic. Mike's an amazing interviewer.
Thank you.
I want to go deeper with you on the one-on-one relationships with these high-caliber people.
Yep.
I remember I was at one of John Levy's events, and I met this super high-caliber director who had directed some of my favorite childhood movies, and I had mentioned to him that Sarah and I do events.
Yeah.
And I got, we exchanged contact info. And I asked you before I wrote him and invited him, I was like, Michael, what should I write to this guy? Because I'm not used to someone that has probably this many people trying to get him to come to their event.
Right.
And you had some brilliant advice.
Thank you.
So talk more. You mentioned already how to make that exchange of contact information happen by letting the person know that you have something that is interesting.
Yes.
What do you do then?
Okay, so first thing I think, principle, so just to take it to the very basic level, I think having something interesting to mention is something people should be thinking about before they even meet said director. So that's why I think having like a monthly dinner or hike or whatever that is something compelling. In the context of if you're going after people who I would say have a high demand on their attention, which is what you're bringing to bear right now, I like to think of very unique experiences. So I would say Rising Glen, which is one of the events that you host, is a very unique experience because you've got these TED caliber speakers that are coming into a very intimate environment. Now, for me, one of the things I like to do, in addition to dinners, etc., is I think of very unique experiences that I'm pretty sure they've never done, and I have that as a caliber of invitation. So for example, and I've invited you and Sarah to one, I support a charity called Wolf Connection, and they have a wolf sanctuary, and they have full moon hikes. And I'm using this as an example because it actually answers your question through story. So I will meet people, like I met, for example, this is very random, but I met like Woody Harrelson and Owen Wilson, and they sat down next to us at dinner, and we're chatting. And I was interested in connecting with Woody further. I didn't have a tangible like objective, but I basically just randomly was like, "Do you like wolves?" You know, very interesting question, right? Like, and he was like, "Yeah." And so I was like, "Well, I have. There's just I'm not part of it. There's no personal interest, but there's this amazing wolf sanctuary, and it's one of the coolest things to do in Los Angeles. They have 35 rescued wolves, and they do full moon hikes. If you're interested, I'd be happy to connect you." And he's like, "Yeah, I'd love to take my daughter." And, I could have gone, but I was like, "No, I just want you to have this experience." So like I connected him with Teo, and he took his daughter to the wolf sanctuary. Now, I have never reached out to him since, but if I ever needed to reach out to Woody Harrelson, I now have a point of reference, and I led by adding value. And the way I did that was I created a point of intrigue, right? That actually, Wolf Connection, interestingly enough, has led to me not only bringing you and other, I won't name names, but people I've brought there that have been, coveted folks that I would never otherwise know.
Well, like a Woody is one. That's
a Woody, but and other, other folks of that
yeah.
sort of hard to reach nature. But like it's led to me serendipitously, like now I'm part of this, it's kind of wild men's group where it's like, Moby, who I met at the thing, then it said, "Hey, I'd love to thank you. We'll have you to dinner at my restaurant." And he brought Bill, who helped us with Global Citizen from Coachella, and then Flea and Tony Canal from No Doubt. So it's like all these amazing like rock stars that I just had, some of my greatest heroes from youth. And like literally we've gone and, we'll go to, now we have like a regular dinner at Moby's restaurant. Or like Teo just invited us to do a sweat lodge at the Wolf Sanctuary, and it's like that's a sacred ritual. But like I'm literally doing a sweat lodge with some of my favorite rock stars on the planet, and it's like those are unique experiences, right?
Yes.
Now I use that. That's obviously not necessarily entirely relatable to everyone, but to distill that down, I think your question really is like, how do you approach it? To me, the approach is how can I, first principle, add massive value. But I think also, and you're really good at this with copywriting, what's the point of intrigue, right?
A point of
what's
intrigue.
A point of intrigue? And also making it no pressure. That's another key element.
That's something you're really good at.
Yeah, so you wrote the email, and I remember being like, you had framed it in a certain way. The other thing is you also don't want to back yourself into a corner. What do I mean by that? I mean, basically articulate it in such a way that it's easy for you to reach out again in a non-pressure way down the track without having limited yourself in the interaction, right? So like, if I were to distill that down, like say you wanted to invite him to your dinner, instead of being like, because you don't know if he's available on the 19th, I'm just making this up, instead of being like, "Hey, I'd love for you to come to my dinner on the 19th. If he doesn't reply and he doesn't come, then where do you go from that after that email?
Right, you can't be like,
it's
"Hey,
hard
another
to follow.
dinner."
I know you didn't show up. It's like now you're in a weird place. I like to be like, "Hey, I throw these dinners. I happen to be having one on the 19th. If you're free, please come as my guest. Bring whoever you want. No pressure. Otherwise, see you down the road." Something that's like very casual, no pressure, very friendly. And see you down the road is an opportunity where I'm implicitly articulating that I may reach out again, but I'm not asking for anything. And I've already said no pressure.
But you wouldn't say, because what I would think when you first mentioned this,
Yeah.
I'm thinking in my head that you're going to say, "Hey, I'm having a dinner. One's on the 18th.
Yes.
If you're around, love to have you. If not, no pressure. And but let me know if you might want to come to a future one."
Yeah.
So kind of ask permission to invite again. You wouldn't do that.
What I
then if you don't hear back on that, then
what I wouldn't do is I wouldn't put pressure, because let me know still requires their immediate response. And some people, especially very busy people, don't necessarily want to give you so. And especially in LA,
giving them
frankly,
another task to respond to an email.
Exactly. Basically what you want to do is set up a rationale by which you may reach out again at a future point in time without having put it out there, so that if they don't respond, it's either awkward for you or awkward, even more importantly, for them.
Yeah, they feel
right?
like
It's
they owed you a response.
Exactly. You don't want anyone to feel like they owe you anything. You want to basically
even an email is a really a big deal for someone who gets a ton of emails and has a lot of dependency.
Yeah, I always articulate in some way no pressure to respond, right? Like, so even if like, even if someone's, for example, like an epic, so for example, Laird Hamilton, Gabby Bernstein, I just had on the podcast, right? So she's like, I'll share it, right? She told me she would share it. She's like, send it to me, I'll share it. Right now, asking for someone to share is still an ask, even if they've already said I'll share it, right?
Right.
Now, when I follow up with her, I basically send her the episode, and I'm like, traditionally I'll do a voice note. I think video notes are great. I also think it's important to differentiate yourself in terms of how you communicate. Emails are rough. I love handwritten notes, handwritten thank you notes, because people are used to only getting bills in the mail. Handwritten note is great.
That's great.
Or I love to do a video note. There's a gentleman who just wrote a book called Fearvana. He actually got the Dalai Lama to write his introduction, and having hosted His Holiness the Dalai Lama, I know how hard that is. To forward his book, and he's not a big name author at all. How did he go about doing it? He wrote a very heartfelt, thoughtful video note, and then followed up with frequency in a no pressure way, right? So other people are applying these same principles, but basically you want to do it in such a way that feels additive. And I said to her on the note, here's the episode. I didn't say, you said you'd share it, you better share it out. No, of course. I was like, here, I'd love it if you share it, but zero expectation. So I always qualify being like, hey, be great if you share it, because I do want to articulate that that's if it'd be great if you did, but at the same time, zero expectation. I'm not gonna, there's no like, if you don't, and I mean it, like literally, like if you don't, that's cool. Like,
and you legitimately are
legitimately
cool
mean
with
it. Like
It
I've
has
already
to be
feel like someone's
authentic.
been of service to me.
Yeah.
I hope that they see it as being of service to them. Obviously, they probably do, or they wouldn't have come on the show. But basically, and I mean it. And the beautiful part of that is there's nothing in there that, like, if she doesn't reply or she didn't share, for example, that I couldn't reach out, say 6 months from now or 3 months from now, in a way where it's now like awkward, right? It's like, okay, hey, by the way, here's a point of contact. You always want your point of contact to either be a value add or neutral. I feel like you don't want it to be, you can, I guess Gary Vaynerchuk uses the jab, jab, right hook. Sometimes obviously you do make the ask, but if you do have an ask, you still want it to be a no pressure ask, right?
Okay.
So I on the phone with you yesterday, I can't remember making asks of you, but I'm sure, I've asked you to be on the podcast. But like, I was like, I'd like to host a dinner with you, right? But I was like very explicit to say zero pressure, only if in resonance, and that's something I always do, right? Where it's like, hey, I'd love to have a communication with you about it. I'm sowing a seed, something we can follow up on.
And that made me feel more open with you.
Yeah.
And being like, here's my dilemma around this date.
Exactly.
And
it was super helpful feedback.
Yeah.
In fact, because I reached out to Eli, our mutual friend who's the chef, and I was like, I'd like to do a dinner. I was thinking I'd like to do it before December, but I actually got great feedback from Craig. And when would you be available in December? Would you be available in January? And so like, your feedback was actually super also helpful for me.
Yeah.
So I think that's the thing, is like, you always want to be thinking about an exchange such that it's mutually additive. And again, to go to that tenet, it's a win-win for both people.
Okay, I have 2 questions around this.
Yes.
So I have a friend, I won't say his name, but he's friends with some of the biggest celebrities in the world.
Yep.
And sometimes he has like shown text threads with them to me. And he does something where like one of his friends will come out with a new album or something like that. And it's not like Bono, but it'll be like people at that level.
Sure.
And he'll be like, hey man, saw the reviews of your new album are coming in amazing, like that's awesome. And he'll send like those type of things to them.
Yes.
And I know some people like that. And I feel like if I send that sometimes, I'm just like they're getting that from so many people so much.
Yeah.
I
think you want to go personal view. I like to go when other people aren't going, right? So like everyone's going to think of an artist when they're in their big moment. It's interesting, like back when I was, hosting Global Citizen those first few years, everyone would come out of the woodwork in September. Why? Because they wanted tickets. so like, there's like your true friends who are there, who are showing up for you when it ain't in their explicit interest, and then they're your sort of fair weather friends, so to speak. And I think with artists, in a much bigger scale, they've got a lot of, and they're probably always thinking about like, who just wants something from me or not. I think what's great about what your friend does, I'm not saying good or bad, he may have epic relationships or she may have epic relationships. I personally like to connect and find times to reach out in ways that are also unique when other people aren't reaching out, such that it feels like it's not necessarily associated with something that may be an extraction of value.
Gotcha.
That's my particular point of view. It's and that's why like doing these unique experiences is interesting, right? Because it's like zero pressure. It's a group gathering. I'm not being like, hey, do you want to go out for like a beer? And if you say no, it's awkward. Not that I drink beer, but anyway, it's more like, hey, I'm getting this epic group of people together. And I may actually, so here's one thing I will say, I may actually invite certain people that I know will be of interest to that person, not in a manipulative way, but in a way where it's like, you know, and I probably won't, it depends on the context of how intimate our relationship is in terms of the depth, but I may be like, so like for you, if I was inviting you and I was like, Craig, I'd love for you to come and I know your interests, you know, if I actually, and I really wanted you to show up, I might invite one or two people that I think you would think would be super cool, either because it'd be a business value, just like a aligned personal interest. And I think that's where it comes down to like really getting to know what the other person deeply cares about, that I think, you know, it makes like a huge difference. I'll give a cogent example. So I reached out recently, you know, so Tim Ferriss, we've met a few times. I wouldn't call him a close friend by any means, but I have his cell phone number. And on occasion, not when his book's launching, although if I could help him support his book, I would totally reach out at that point. So more if I could add value to him as opposed to, but you know, like when knowing what he's interested in, if an article or a person or a unique experience that I don't think he probably already knows about comes about, and I know because I'm on his 5 Bullet Friday or whatever, I'm reading what he cares about, what he thinks is interesting. So I've now got like, okay, I've got my mind out. If something comes up that I think will be of interest, every few months I may ping that with no expectation of any reply, etc. Just like, hey, I think this might be of value, right? Like, I think the principle of maintaining relationships in a way where you reach out when other people aren't reaching out with unique information, experiences, products that could be of service, that's the way I approach it.
I like that. So back to the one-on-one thought.
Yes.
And back to Woody Harrelson.
Yeah.
He'd be a great podcast guest for you, I think.
Yes,
So
he would be.
Will that be someone that you would reach out to? And if so, how does that ask go?
Okay, great question. So I haven't thought about Woody as a podcast guest. He would be an amazing guest. I would likely structure it, so the way I think about it, I would likely wait a little while. Why? I'm 50 episodes in and I've had epic people, but I'd love to get a few more under my belt that may be referential for him, because I would, also, what's the anchor for the other person, right?
Okay.
So like, say for example, let me use a cogent example. So Rich Roll just had Ed Norton on, right? If I had Ed Norton on, or someone that actually probably more relevant would be like an Owen Wilson, right? Or like someone that I know is a friend of his or that he cares about or sees himself in the same ilk as. Once that's happened, then I would be like, hey, I had this cool episode with XYZ. And if there's something that he's actually looking to promote, where it's like he's actually putting himself in the arena, he has an agenda and orientation, right? The reason Ed Norton was on Rich Roll's show, I'm sure they're probably friendly anyway, but like he was pushing Motherless Brooklyn, right? So, which was a great film. So thinking about when is it aligned with someone else's best timing, because they're actually, which is why you see so many people go on podcasts when they're doing a book launch or they're doing a film or whatever. So I think doing it when it's of best interest to them, and then thinking about other anchors that legitimate the context of him coming on, I would approach it that way, and I would make it a no pressure. I'd be like, hey, I hope you had an epic time. I probably would invite him to something else before I even, like something else that's of value, before I even made that ask, because my principle is give before any ask.
What if you got no wolf hike?
Yes.
And you meet someone high level, and you want to either have them come to a dinner party or be on a podcast. I feel these are situations that most people
are in.
Are getting into.
So let's get it real tactical. So if someone wants to invite someone to a dinner party or a podcast, and they don't necessarily have an opportunity to lead with a particular give.
And let's say the podcast doesn't have a big audience too, because if you're Tim Ferriss and you're promising 1 million downloads, that's a very different ask
100%.
than if you're Craig Clemens and the show has not even launched yet.
100%. I would articulate it. So there's a couple different ways I would go about it. I would go after whoever the anchor is that gives you the greatest credibility, and exercise whatever relation, and I don't like this word, but relational capital you can to secure an anchor that will be taken as of notice by the people you desire to get. So
Okay.
I'll give a cogent example. If, for example, you were a mom blogger and you want, this is random, but like, and you were starting a podcast around mom bloggers, your anchor might be Wellness Mama, because she's got an insanely voracious. So that might be the big ask for you.
Okay, so
right?
Wellness Mama is a big blogger.
Big blogger
Huge
in that
audience.
mom space.
Yeah.
Right. I would research the heck out of Wellness Mama.
Okay.
I would find what she cares about, and then I would find a way to add value to what she cares about in my ask.
Okay.
Love to have you on the podcast. No pressure. Here's why I think we could have an amazing conversation and you'd be of value to my audience. And here's what I would love to do in return. I know another gentleman, I won't mention his name, but when he was just coming up, he's now got a very large following. You know, he wanted to talk to Gary Vee. He's like, look, Gary, I will commit to supporting you and selling 1,000 books. You know?
Okay.
Now that's a big stretch, right? Because, but if you're like, hey, I really want to get noticed by someone who's got so many people chatting at him, it's the same strategy that video guy who had no particular following made with Tim Ferriss. He's like, look, I'll come to you, I'll make a video for free. If you don't like it, throw it away, right? That video actually led him to get the video with Tim Ferriss, which he then used to get a video with Richard Branson, which he then used to get a video with Tony Robbins.
Wow.
So he's stacked. So in that same strategy I talked about before of almost the triangle, top being your anchor, you go simultaneously after the anchor and do whatever you can, exercise maximum value to add value to that anchor, and then simultaneously stack from the bottom up in the same style that video maker did with the Tim Ferriss. You know, there's probably other equivalents that he could have reached out and offered his services free of charge, right? That's a huge value added stretch.
Yes.
He probably had to pay for the plane ticket. But like almost anyone out there can find a way with relatively modest resources to think of who's that real like anchor that is a stretch for me where I could figure out a way to add value. That doesn't necessarily mean I have 1 million followers and, you know, I'm going to push it out in the context of that video maker. I can make you an awesome video, and I'm committed to doing that for free. And guess what? I'll go anywhere you want and I'll film it. If you don't like it, you could throw it away. Who's going to say no to that? But yet for him, put that effort out, and then he utilized that as a stepping stone to go 1, 2, 3, and has created this epic context for his life. And I think that's the thing, right? For me, now I didn't think about it in this way. I had a deep personal sort of calling I felt for the Dalai Lama event, but like that, I spent 7 months of my life and nearly, you know, and a huge personal risk to host that event with the Dalai Lama. And you know, it was a tribute to my father, who I have a dear personal relationship with. So that was the rationale for that event. But unequivocally, having done Global Citizen and then hosted that event with the Dalai Lama led so many other people to say yes because of that anchor of credibility of saying, okay, this guy says he sets his mind to something and he does it. I know he's going to follow through. And so the anchors of those experiences, I'm quite sure have had consequence on others, because I don't have the same following as Tim Ferriss by any means, you know, like he's been at it for a long time and wrote, you know, 5 New York Times bestselling books. So, but yet I've been able to get some incredible guests in some ways, probably beyond what I would, you know, legitimately be able to call for, given the fact that, you know, I do have a great podcast, but it's only 5 months old or 6 months old. And that's because of the credibility of those other anchor moments. So I think finding the credibility builders and then simultaneously thinking, how do I add outsized value, even in my own, whatever that is, our own modest ways, to me is the mechanism to think about the mindset of like approach as you build your platform. One-on-one or in terms of, you know, building a broader based set of relationships as you think about, as you articulated, that top 5. Who are those 5 people, whether virtually or in person, I want to build a relationship with, that I think if I do so, even if it's just, that relationship may be just a podcast, maybe 45 minutes, that if I do so, and also, by the way, get super technical, a Skype, for example, like, you know, you can be like, hey, I'll fly to you anywhere in the world. That shows real dedication, right? Like, again, to use that Wellness Mama example, if that mom blogger was like, I'll go anywhere in the world you are, it shows your commitment. It shows that you're not just an average, like I'm writing out to 50 people. And secondly, or by the way, if you've got 20 minutes, I'm happy to do it by Skype, right? Like make it an easy ask, right? Like show your determination, because everyone, if you can inspire someone's shared humanity, I think you'll get the ability for people to resonate with that is so profound. With the Dalai Lama context, I wrote a letter to a gentleman I knew who had a relationship with the Dalai Lama, and it was deeply personal. My father had been diagnosed with dementia, and I realized the consequences societally of cognitive decline, and I saw the Harvard research around meditation, and it was something where I was like, I think this can be a benefit to a lot of people. My background is throwing philanthropic events. I'm committed to throwing a beautiful event if there's a yes, if this is an opportunity. And I just went all out on heart and hard work, and that luckily eventuated, but it was very risky that it wouldn't. But I think to me, I wasn't someone who had that relationship already. It wasn't like an easy ask. It was like, okay, how can I think through, like strategically, what would be of value and what would speak hopefully to someone's heart enough that there would potentially be a yes.
And you thought about hosting his birthday party?
Yes.
Hosting the Dalai Lama's
his 80th birthday party, yes.
So you saw that was coming up and you got that idea?
That's right. Yeah, at the time I was actually speaking with, this is the longer story I won't go into, but I had met through the Global Citizen, the Mandela family, and I took my father, when he was diagnosed with dementia, to South Africa and developed a very deep reverence. I had already a deep reverence, but a very deep reverence made more personal by my father and my interaction in South Africa around the Mandela legacy. And I knew Mandela Day was coming, right? It was actually only about a week apart from the Dalai Lama's birthday. And so my initial idea was actually like, what if we could throw this big concert in celebration of these sort of Nobel, and long story short, that wasn't tenable, wasn't figure outable. But then I was like, okay, well, what if it's just an honoring of the Dalai Lama's 80th birthday in such a way, because he obviously is so selfless that he wouldn't care if, like, he's not like, it's not about him, as he says, he's a simple monk. But more, it was like, I'd love to do a tribute and share the virtue and value of meditation for a number of people, and using His Holiness's teachings as a vehicle. And I'd be happy to create that platform. Hopefully I have some credibility because I've done XYZ events, and I'd love to host an event to honor. I know he's going to be here for these other events. So I made it, I found what was already sort of in the field, right? I wasn't saying, hey, fly across the world to do my event. It was like, okay, there's 2 other events happening that were big, 20,000 person events. I was like, I actually want to do a live stream so it can be seen by many people, but I want to do a very intimate event, and I want it to be outdoors, and I'd like it to be like a beautiful, and it was like incredible because the Dalai Lama literally walked by this tree and like blesses this tree, and the thing he talks about, for people can listen to it on the podcast if you want. It's the first episode, but he goes through this whole like sort of articulation about nature, and to me that was like so cool because the vision I had was wanting to see him in nature as opposed to like some big convention center, and to create this sort of honoring, and obviously to have my family there, and so that dream became manifest through this commitment and hard work. But it was because of like aligning that vision to something bigger.
Wow. Man, I want to run out and start applying this stuff. This is fantastic and so applicable and unique.
Yeah, thank you, brother.
Yeah, you've got a really unique, you've got a particular set of skills that you've built up.
Well, I think it's the alchemy. It's so, if I were to distill it down, it's social alchemy, right? Like something, I think if we think about things as, we all have, for example, you and I love pizza, right? We often bond over our shared love of pizza. But a great slice of pizza is about the sum of its ingredients, such that the dance in your mouth of that slice of pizza is unique. And I think that's about the alchemy of those ingredients. And I think one can apply that same alchemy when thinking about their relationships, right? Like when you think about adding value and creating the most delicious, delightful contexts and experiences for people to come together and delight in that experience together, then you've created a social alchemy. And that social alchemy has consequence beyond even what we initially envisioned, because the sum of the parts are bigger than what we could even anticipate.
Boom. Amazing. So Peak Mind is the podcast. Where
Yes.
can people follow you and find out more about your work? Is it Michael Trainer on Instagram?
Yep, at Michael Trainer on Instagram.
Is that where you're
social
most
channels.
active?
Yep,
Okay.
Instagram most active. Peak Mind Podcast.
And the
on
podcast,
Apple.
of course. Peak Mind Podcast.
Peak Mind with Michael Trainer, and peakmind.org for the website, which I have, thanks to you, actually, by the way. Craig's inspired me on the mailing, and I committed to and now providing exclusive content through the mailing, a large measure of which was due to your great help and counsel. So thank you, Craig.
Pleasure's mine. Yeah, get on an email list because that Instagram algorithm is not getting any friendly.
No, not doing us any favors.
Yeah, man, thanks for being here.
Thank you, brother.
Amazing.
Pleasure.
Thanks so much for watching. If you want to hear a story that's even wilder than that one, click here. You only have 5 seconds though. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go!